someone I know personally, and alhamdulillah, he has decided to sign the bayat and join the community of the Promised Messiah alayhi salatu wasalam. He is here with us, and I'll invite him onto the stage. Trevon, Brock, please come up. And inshallah, we'll all witness him signing the bayat form, and inshallah, we'll join our hands together with Sayyid Amir Safir Sahib and pray for the brother and welcome him into the community. Come here. And he had a message that he also wanted to share after this. Let's go.
नारे तकबीर, नारे तकबीर। हजरत मोहम्मद मुस्तफ़ा, हजरत मोहम्मद मुस्तफ़ा। गुलाम अहमद की, गुलाम अहमद की, गुलाम अहमद की। इस्लाम अहमदियत, इस्लाम अहमदियत। खिलाफत अहमदिया, खिलाफत अहमदिया। इन्नी माँ का, इन्नी माँ का, इन्नी माँ का। नारे तकबीर।
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon, my brothers and sisters. I have a beautiful poem that I wanted to write to the Khalifa. I personally think that it's beautiful, that I wanted to share to you guys. I wrote was, my name is Trevon Brock. I am taking my bayat tonight at the National Jamaat USA. Wish me luck and peace and blessings on this new road I have taken. Islam is like a layer of info that you have to dig deep to find its roots to where the real truth of its life is hidden. Look at it like a knowledge of trees spreading its roots that can go deeper than the seas and feeds off the love of Ahmadiyya community. And Allah reward us with His fruits and beautiful leaves. No wonder why we are growing so fast. Just like trees, the longer we bond, the longer we last. They say everything has its own ending, but my love for you and Allah and this ummah will always last. This is my message to you and many more to come. What shall be my name for this new journey that has begun? And also, I would like to explain my journey to the Ahmadiyya community was that I used to always have Muslim friends around, but I really know, like, I wouldn't really know what is Islam. I didn't know what were Muslims. Growing up as teenagers, we used to like think like Islam was like a race or something. Like people used to say, "Oh, do you speak Muslim?" and stuff like that. That's when something kind of in the back of my mind just popped up like out of nowhere. Like I want to go to a masjid. Now, me personally, I don't believe that Allah makes things. Well, no, let me take that back. I don't believe that things happen on accident. I believe that it's Allah's will that has guided me towards this Ahmadiyya masjid. I personally did not know what were different between Sunni, Shias, and Ahmadiyya. I just happened to end up at the Ahmadiyya masjid in St. Louis. And the first person that greeted me was my brother, Dibasab. And the first thing was that we sat and talking, and he asked me about what brought me to Islam, how did I get here, technically. Then I told him the story, basically the same story that I have explained, and it all started off from that. And me going back and back, it almost felt like Brother Dibba was like a kind of a second father to me, because he will always give me wisdom and stuff like that people outside and inside of my household couldn't give me. And when I mean by wisdom, I mean by like Islam. I didn't know much about Islam. I didn't know much about the Prophet or the Sunnah or the Khalifa. I did not know much about that. And then me just by learning more about what Ahmadiyya really is, it made me fall more in love with it. So now I really want to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guiding me to Ahmadiyya, and that I was able to overlook what are Sunnis and Shias, because usually when people convert, they don't really know what is Ahmadiyya. Most of the Muslims that I do hang around, they don't know what is Ahmadiyya, and I'm glad that I'm blessed with this opportunity to come up here and talk about my journey to Islamic Ahmadiyya. So that'll be all that I have to say for right now. I'm pretty sure later on I will have more to say, but I just want to thank the people that have given me opportunities, and definitely Brother Khairu. Brother Khairu he's probably, I don't want to say he's one of the main people, but he is those people that have kept me into the masjid and show me what is true Islam, and show me how it feels to take care of one another and sacrifice for the will of Allah. And he showed me what what a Muslim is. That helped me want to learn more about Islam and learning the Arabic language and stuff like that. So that'll be all for my speech for today, and I wish you pieces and blessings for tonight. That'll be all.
नाराए तकबीर नाराए तकबीर हजरत खातमुल अंबिया हजरत खातमुल अंबिया गुलाम अहमद की गुलाम अहमद की नाराए तकबीर.
Please, let's do dua. Bismillah. Ameen. I'm grateful once again, and I've said this before, to the Khalifatul Masih for the blessings we continue to enjoy as members of Majlis Khudam al-Ahmadiyya, and in Huzur sending his representative to be here with us and spend all these days with us. This session we now have, we know by now, Alhamdulillah, Sayyid Amir Safir Sahib is a live devotee who spends his days and nights in the service of Islam Ahmadiyyat. For many years, he's had direct training on the Hazrat Khalifatul Masih, knowledge, wisdom, exposure, one-on-one opportunities to learn the moves, the decisions, observe the prayers of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih, and has been sent on many missions to serve the purpose of Islam Ahmadiyyat, directly being guided by Khalifatul Masih. So inshallah tonight, I know he has interviewed Huzur on many occasions, and you've enjoyed the skill that he has in interviewing and getting Huzur to share information with us. So tonight I'll try, inshallah as well, to kind of prompt him to guide us through the words of Khalifatul Masih as much as possible, especially when it comes to the challenges we face as youth and in finding our identity. So without further ado, I would kind of request Amir Safir Saab to start his opening statement with a few words, and we'll get straight into it. Making it easy for me. He wants me to ask first, and then we'll take it from there. So, Amir Safir Saab, I'll just put you in a position that I've been in. I've traveled around the entire country. I've had the opportunity to visit all the majalis, 53, in this year, and I've learned a lot. I'm still learning. One of the most common questions I get, especially from the youth, is with regards to their identity, in the challenges they face, and how to fulfill their purpose as Ahmadi Muslims, fulfilling our pledge, in the face of all the challenges that they face, whether it comes to relationships, whether it comes to drugs, exposure to the opposite gender, anything. There's so many questions that I get. So based on your experience and your questions that you've asked Huzur, what kind of guidance have you received from Huzur in this regard?
So what I would say is something that Hazur often says nowadays, that in one sense it's more difficult nowadays because of the social media and the pressures. And Hazur once said the youth today, it's more difficult than ever before. It's what you guys, the Khudam and Atfal, it's more difficult than your parents' generation because of the availability of the internet, because of the immorality that spread. So in that sense, it is more difficult. At the same time, in some ways, it's more easier to uphold your identity. And Hazur often mentioned this, if you listen to him nowadays, that it's not just us saying these things anymore. Before, when I was growing up, it was only us saying this from an Islamic point of view. Now, the things that we say, the things that Hazur says, the people in these societies are saying the same thing. Because they have spent so long without any moral code. They're leaving Christianity, they're leaving other religious things. So now, they're trying to find solutions, and strangely, some of those solutions seem to be Islamic solutions. So I'll give you an example. This is something when I was going around across the USA in 2016, there was obviously questions about free mixing, about segregation. And sometimes that's a question, you go to university, college, wherever you are, and sometimes you do, a minority might say that, why do we need to do this? It's not a big problem, etc., etc. But just a few years ago, something came, which started largely in the United States, was the Me Too movement. And why was that caused? It was caused because we found out that this complete liberalism of allowing everything to happen, and Hazur has covered this many times, of just allowing absolute free mixing, it doesn't work. It's all fake. On the surface, when you peel behind the surface, you see many issues, and Hazur has mentioned this. So for example, Hazur mentioned a statistic that in the United Kingdom, over 90% of girls under the age of, I think, 25 have faced SA in their lifetime, yes? In the USA, I was seeing the statistic, is 81% of girls have faced this kind of abuse in their lifetime. And Hazur mentioned that it's strange that now in Germany, in New Year's, they have a separate section for women. In some countries, including the United States and England, there's a rise of female-only gyms. I'm not saying everyone does that. There's many women who are happy to go to mixed gyms. But there's a website it's about female empowerment. And it's interesting. It starts by saying, it's in the United States. They say, we all know about the male gaze. This is a non-Muslim website. And we all know as women how it feels going to the gym and having to get the male gazes towards us. And that's why we need more female-only gyms. In England, there was such a big problem on the public transport because if you've been to England, in London, it's very tight spaces. Everyone is crammed together. You can't even move. And some men were using that inappropriately to, come near to women physically. As a result of this caused so much issue in England that they had to run national ad campaigns. They had to put posters and extra security and say this is a criminal act, to the extent that a member of parliament, equivalent to your senator here, said that the only solution to this is that we have to have separate carriages. So this is just an example in segregation. I can give you another example. Hazur has mentioned this about alcohol. He mentioned this recently. I know it's an obvious example, but 1400 years ago, Hazur mentioned, the Quran mentioned about alcohol. And there's an anecdote of Hazur which he mentioned to me himself, that when Hazur was in Ghana, it once happened that Hazur's neighbor, who was a colonel, sent a bottle of alcohol and said to Hazur, keep it in the fridge. And Hazur, of course, refused it and said, no, I can't do this, absolutely, please take it back. And that neighbor became really angry with Hazur and said, why can't you do it? Just keep it there, use it for someone else. He said, no, absolutely not, I can't. And the neighbor became so angry, he left. And Hazur then had to go and explain to him that, listen, in my religion, in Islam, it says the one who drinks alcohol, the one who sells alcohol, the one who deals with alcohol, trades alcohol, will be sent in the hellfire. So I don't want to be in the hellfire, so I cannot accept this gift, please understand. He said, okay, now I understand. Again, this is an example of keeping your identity, where we don't compromise, say, okay, let's, for the sake of keeping them happy, we'll just do it and do it later. No, you keep your identity and you explain, and they understood. Even the example I mentioned to you previously about free mixing, Hazur instilled this. Like, for example, in Review of Religions, I have to go out on many media conferences, and alhamdulillah, through Hazur's prayers, I'm not saying this for the sake of saying anything about myself, but just to give my point, which I'm about to make, that I have to go in many circles where you have the top media people, the top presidents of National Geographic, Time. I'm in these circles all the time. Now, Hazur explained to me how I should behave before I go. He told me about my identity. So I'm saying this because here, especially in America, I have many successful business people out, and often they say that, you can't do parda, you can't keep your identity to reach this level. But I am now in this circle through Hazur's prayers, where I'm with these people all the time at the top level of the media. Just a few weeks ago, I met the chairman of Sky News, CEO of The Guardian. Again, I'm not saying this because I'm saying something about myself, but to prove my following point about keeping your identity. So when I go there, I don't shake hands with women. I don't go to the places where they go. And it was new for them. Many of these people at this level of executive level had never heard of Ahmadiyyat or never communicated with Muslims. Most people understood. But there was some woman, again, Hazur explained to me, this is what you have to do. There was some woman who minded it, and they demanded an explanation. I had to sit with them for 15 minutes and explain to them. And I gave them the explanation that Hazur gave me. Not Hazur gave me, but Hazur said this. I was with Hazur in a press conference in Germany about 4 years ago. There was a press conference in Germany for Jalsa. And a reporter asked Hazur that why don't Muslims shake hands with the opposite gender. And Hazur said such a beautiful answer, and I use this wherever I go. Hazur said, first of all, it's not just us who don't shake hands. There's many people of the Jewish faith, especially Orthodox Jewish faith, who don't shake hands. If you go here to New York, I've been in contact with many of the rabbis here. In the UK, there's a place called Stamford Hills, the biggest Jewish community. I've been there. They do more segregation than Muslims. I was surprised. I went into a Jewish rabbi's house. They quickly closed the door of the woman. I went near a synagogue. They have men and women separate. They don't shake hands. And Hazur made this point, that it's not just Muslims. Jewish people do it as well. But you won't say anything to them. You only say it to us. Like, we're happy they do it. So number one. Number two, Hazur said that whilst we might not shake hands, if tomorrow you, God forbid, started drowning in water or river, I'd be the first one to jump in and save you, physically grab you, because in that case, it's a different situation. So I used these arguments when I went outside, and I explained to them further, this lady, she was very senior in the industry. She was the marketing director of one of the biggest brands, which covers 20 media publications, many of which you are familiar with. So when I explained to her this concept, and I said, it's not just about shaking hands. Shaking hands in itself might not do anything, but we have boundaries, we have limits. The point is not just a physical thing, but you might fall into an emotional connection, and we have limits, we still interact. Anyhow, when I gave all these explanations, she fell into an identity crisis, not me. And she started questioning her own kind of connections with her male friends. She's like, wait, should I have male friends? What do you think? I said, well, it's up to you, but this is what our belief is. And similarly, this example of Hazur, which I mentioned about the alcohol and how he kept strong, there's another example in Ghana, which I mentioned in the Itfal, but not everyone would have heard it, is that I was able to interview Hazur's son, Mia Waqas, about his experiences as a child when he was growing up. And he mentioned that when we were in Ghana, Hazur, we were in a Christian school. Hazur's children were in a Christian school. And in the Christian school, of course, when you have to, in the assembly or in the kind of, when you're in the morning, you have to sing a hymn about Jesus. And in that hymn about Jesus, you have to say, Jesus is the Son of God. But Hazur told them that whatever you do, you can say everything else which is according to our belief, but you cannot say Jesus is the Son of God. You can say Jesus is the Prophet of God, or you stay silent. Again, some people sometimes, some parents might say, okay, just say it and then forget it. Just keep them happy. You know, Hazur, identity. No, we stick firm to our beliefs. So it was a predominantly Christian country, Ghana, although there's Muslims, and so they did this. Hazur's son said, this is what we did. What happened next? They were physically punished by their teacher. Hazur's children were physically punished by their teacher. So, and this is not going to happen here in your country. This is what you're talking about, keeping your identity. Sometimes Khuddam say it's very difficult for us. So they got physically punished. They come home. They tell Hazur what happens. And he explains that Hazur then, of course, look, what Hazur did as a parent, he went to the school, he went to the principal and explained to them that, look, we believe in Jesus as a prophet of God. We have respect. But in our belief, we unwaveringly believe in the oneness of God. To associate any partners with God is one of the biggest transgressions and sins which we can never do. And Hazur continued to explain. So first of all, he acted as a loving parent. He took the defense of his child and explained the belief. He didn't just put them to go tell them to explain. Hazur did that. Secondly, when they came home, what did Hazur explain to his children? His children explained in this interview which we did. And before this, by the way, Hazur's son explained that the first thing which Hazur taught us from the Quran, he said often in the Waqf syllabuses and other things, they had sometimes Inna Atayna Kal Kawthar or other things to make it easy for the kids. But Hazur said, no, the first thing that we were taught by Hazur was Surah Al-Ikhlas, about the oneness of God. And this was very important to understand the attributes of God. So anyhow, when they came home and Hazur went and explained to the teachers, they came home, so he took defense as a parent. Hazur then explained to his children the example of Hazrat Bilal. And he said that, look what happened to Hazrat Bilal. He became a Muslim, and when he became a Muslim, many of you will know the story of how badly he was physically punished and tortured. He would be dragged across the hot sands of Arabia. He had hot stones placed upon him. When he got exhausted, they would put more torture. And as many of you know, due to his pronunciation, he would say Ahad, Ahad, and he would say that God is one. And Hazur was telling this to his children. And then he would be sent to the children and delinquents and dragged around with rope around his neck. So Hazur said, you can take even physical punishment, but you can never relinquish that belief in the oneness of God no matter what happened. And that was a lesson for him about, again, identity. There's many other examples I can give, which I'm trying to think of. But yeah, so I think, yeah, go ahead.
Jazakallah. I think you touched a little bit on when you get these guidances from Hazur and you go and meet these executives, and do you feel, before you go at least, do you feel like there would be a level of intimidation of all these, senior people? And when you use Huzur's guidance, how much confidence does it give you, and what do you learn from that?
As I said, I've seen so many people go into an identity crisis. When you explain to them, based on what I've learned from Hazur, they go into an identity crisis. So I'll give you another example. I went out to another conference, and obviously at the end of the conference, I go home. But some of them, they go out to wherever they go out, to different places. Some of them are inappropriate places. And some of them I know very well. And they would say to me, like, why don't you come there? And like I said, Hazur told me, keep your identity. Again, you Khuddam, you have to go and you have to challenge your identity when you go out. And I said, look, first of all, I'm a married person. Why would I want to go to those places? And they're like, yeah, but your wife's not going to know. So then I explained that, first of all, of course, I explained that I believe there's a God who's watching me, so that's not good enough for me. But from another point of view, I explained that based on what Hazur says to use logic as well in these circumstances. I said, look, why do you want to live a life a lie? Like, you have a family, why do you want to put your marriage at risk and all these situations? How many marriages break up do you know because of these things that you do and you go there? And I started explaining to him in this way. At the end of it, that guy felt so guilty, he sat down and had his head down in shame, and he almost was about to cry because he was not thinking about these things. And again, he went into an identity crisis. So in terms of how much confidence it gives me, I feel like I'm a general. When I get Hazur's guidance, I feel I can go in there and tell them because they haven't heard these things. I mentioned the other day that one of the heads of a very large media network, which brings all the top people, all the top media executives you can imagine come under there. And there's a thing called Media 100. It's a very exclusive club of only CEO, editor level, and there's a huge waiting list. So before I was on this list, the guy who runs it is a very staunch atheist. He went to Oxford University, and he found me in a conference, and he saw a review of religions, and he's like, you could never convince me. I didn't even say anything to him. He's like, I know the God doesn't exist. So then I mentioned, based on Hazur's guidance, the different arguments to do with the existence of God. And he was quiet. He didn't reply. And afterwards, I mentioned on social media, on LinkedIn, he went, and he said that, although I'm a staunch atheist, these were his words, although I'm a staunch atheist, I've never heard arguments like this. They're not my arguments. They're arguments I've learned from Hazur based on the Khulafa. And I want everyone in this media network to listen to these arguments. So in terms of how much energy or confidence Hazur gives, if you can get that, understand that guidance and truly understand it, it's not you who will be in an identity crisis. When other people, sincere amongst them, start thinking about it, they realize how logical it is. They realize how actually it's needed by the world today. And I've seen people go into an identity crisis themselves because they're living this life where they're not actually thinking about these things. When they start to think about it, okay, actually, I'm messing up.
Narae Takbir. Khilafat-e Ahmadiyya. Hazrat Amirul Momineen. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Khamis. Inni Maka. Inni Maka. Narae Takbir.
Amir Sahib, you touched on Huzur being a father and how he raised his children, and you gave that beautiful example. So for yourself, based on the training you had, if you were to go back a little bit, how it all started, from a young age, maybe 20, 21, when you decided to do waqf, you're looking at your journey, could you maybe throw some light on how you received guidance and training on the Khilafat, and how has that kind of helped you grow and mature into where you are now?
I think the very first thing, when I became a waqf, I didn't go to Jamia. I am not a missionary. I didn't know how to read or write Urdu, and I wasn't any, person who could be called scholarly even now. The first thing Hazur wanted me to do was to become familiar with the Jamaat literature, and he would make me read the books of the Promised Messiah. He would make me, it might seem strange to you that I'm not saying read the Quran. Of course read the Quran. But as you know, there's many Muslims around the world who read the Quran and they're doing bad things as well because they don't understand it. When I say read the Promised Messiah, he explains the meanings of the Quran and how to read it properly and tells you how to read it properly and how to offer the prayers. So the very first thing Hazur wanted me to attach with is the writings of the Promised Messiah, which of course enables you to love the Quran more and understand prayers more. So in the beginning, Hazur would... So at the beginning, I did, like I said, I didn't know Urdu and I couldn't translate properly. And Hazur would make me translate certain books of the Promised Messiah, but I didn't know for what purpose. I thought that perhaps Hazur was wanting me to actually translate it at the time and, use it. But later Hazur told me he did it as an exercise just to force me to read it. So I would read the different books of the Promised Messiah, come back and report it to Hazur. Then of course, Hazur wanted me to read the different commentaries of the Holy Quran. But first and foremost, if you don't understand what you're believing in, if we believe in the Promised Messiah but you haven't read what he said, and if you haven't understood what he said, and if you're not attaching with Hazur's sermons which explain it in a simple way, then as Hazur said, there's no point of just being an Ahmadi for the sake of it. And Hazur said many times, there's no point of just having the outer shell. Hazur gives this example often, that just having an outer shell of belief is absolutely useless. You have to know what's inside. So over a period of time, Hazur kind of forced me and guided me to reading the literature, to becoming familiar with the literature. It wasn't just the books of the Promised Messiah. Sometimes he made me read the books of Hazrat Muslim, because sometimes he explains it in a simple way. Sometimes he would make me read, when I started learning Urdu, Al-Fazl, which had very interesting things with the literature. But essentially, the first and foremost aspect of my training, number one, was to become familiar with what actually all the aspects of Ahmadiyyat is. Secondly, one really important part of the training was to ensure, and Hazur likes to, sometimes Hazur does spot checks on the people around him to see if they're going to the mosque. Like I remember once, many years ago, all of a sudden, Hazur just looked up and said, like, how far is the mosque from your house? Which prayers do you go to? And so things like this, Hazur sometimes checks on his staff. And so one of the very important things which Hazur was focusing on was obviously the spiritual aspect as well, which by no means, I'm a very weak person, but from his side, was to understand who we are, why we are, by understanding the actual teachings. And then I had the blessed opportunity to sometimes ask Hazur about it. And secondly, was the fundamental aspect of ensuring basic 5 daily prayer, going to the mosque and saying the prayer. This was really important for Hazur. And I know that Hazur really ensures that this is occurring and wants this to happen. So that was like the beginning of my training.
So as we go into it, I'm sure attendees will also have questions. I'll soon open it up for question and answers, and you can ask any question you want. Especially, Amir Safi Saab mentioned yesterday, he wants to keep it around the guidances of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih that he wants to share. Amir Saab, we're not in Islamabad, we don't get to see the daily activities of Khalifatul Masih, but all of these things you're mentioning is one aspect, is your experience. And we know that days and days, Hazur, there's so many staff members of Hazur, and he sends people to different countries. You've been sent to different countries as well. To you, one person guiding on a continuous level, at all these levels, we're not there, behind the scenes. Could you maybe give us a picture of what that looks like from you as an observer on Hazur's schedule and the guidance that he gives and the kind of tasks that he sends people on?
It's a really important question and a huge question to answer in 2 minutes. What I would say is very interesting is that what I've seen with Hazur is that he is the most perfect reflection of the Holy Prophet ﷺ today. As Hazur, I mentioned yesterday that Hazur said there's a difference between a prophet and a Khalifa, but he's the closest that we have today. And it's amazing the different aspects of his personality which show that. We know, of course, about his spirituality, his closeness to God, but even, what's the difference between I know it's a silly question, but what's the difference between people who follow influencers, and sometimes they spend a lot of money to go watch their concerts or go to them, they'll make so-called sacrifices, they'll so-called dedicate their life to them, their emotions to them. Now, many of these people, some of them you might see like a billionaire giving up all their money, and other people setting up institutes. So there are some good people out there. But the difference between them and ultimately the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the greatest influencer now in this age, Khalifa, is that they just have a few qualities. A few. But what you see first with the Holy Prophet ﷺ is he had every good quality. And that in itself, the Prophet Muhammad explained, one of the miracles of Islam is not just the miracles which you see of the eclipses and these things. The miracle Islam brings, and Hazur is explaining this in his sermons, is the miracle of morals. To be able to have consistent morals across so many different aspects of your life, and to do that consistently every day, is a miracle that I see in Khilafat. Cannot be understated. I'll just give you one example. Who hasn't been jealous in their life? I know I have about something, but I've never ever seen Hazur jealous about anything. I've seen him disappointed, I've seen him show different emotions, but I've never seen him be jealous. For me, that in itself is a reflection of someone who is at such a high level of self-peace, of spirituality and connection with God, that he's almost it's been eliminated in that sense. Then again, so what I would say is what I see in Huzur is such a consistency in morals, which other people might display some, but Huzur displays them across the board in so many different ways. And I want to make an important point. Huzur often has mentioned this in his sermons, that in Islam, a moral is dependent on the time and place. In Islam, a moral is dependent on time and place. So you can be angry at one point, and it can be a good moral, and you can be angry at another point, and it can be a bad moral. So for example, your child does something wrong, you get angry, and you do it for reformation, that's a good time. To not be angry then would be bad, because you're stopping them. And then Huzur explained, I mentioned this yesterday, I didn't mention this, but Huzur said that sometimes parents get so angry with their children, he mentioned this in the recent sermon as well, they get so angry with their children that it's almost, the Promised Messiah said it's a type of shirk. So that type of anger is wrong. So what I want to say in answer to your question, Sir Sahib, is that another miracle I've seen in Khilafat is the way that he somehow naturally, or through that, because he's the Khalifa, for me a truth of him being the Khalifa, is that he always seems to know the right time and place to exhibit a certain moral. Whether it's disappointment or anger, whether it's other types of emotions, it's always at the right time and place. And Islam defines a moral of doing it at the appropriate time and place. And often you'll find other people, I was going to mention this tomorrow, but I'll mention this now. So for example, take the Pope. Sometimes he will dilute certain teachings of Christianity to appease the world. But I know that when the Arab Spring happened, when many other events happened, even small events like when Facebook came out and Huzur advised against it, and now we see the state of Facebook. Many of you will know here how many scandals has been involved, and most people have moved away from it due to even government regulations. As you see, the founder have been called to the Senate. But anyhow, and many of these occasions, I remember on one such occasion, like the Arab Spring was a big thing in the Middle East. All the Arab countries were rising up, and everyone seemed to be in favor of now finally they'll get the liberation. But Huzur was saying the way they did it was wrong. Short-term revolutions never lead to anything. And this way will actually lead to them being harmed even more. And we saw that. And I'm saying on all these social issues, you can go to many other issues. I remember Huzur said something to me once really interesting, and it goes back to the aspect of morals. He said that, I don't follow the mob or the crowd. And he said there was so much force that I was taken aback. I don't follow the crowd. I follow what Allah has ordained, even if the whole world turns against me. So in answer to your question, there's many different aspects I can tell you about, but I find the aspect of consistent morality across all a range of morals, and to do that every day and to do it at the right time and place, the Holy Prophet has explained, as you know, that is one of the miracles of Islam, which Huzur displays to us every day.
Talk about morals, and I want to divert it more to all of us personally. People are married and they're looking for true love, or they're hoping for true love. There's young people who aspire to get married. They come across people at school, at college. Sometimes they're attracted to them. Sometimes they're tempted, and it's hard to make the right decision. Some people think they found true love, and they want to invest their future into someone that essentially they don't know. So I want you to kind of touch on that a little bit. I think that's something that can relate to everyone when it comes to relationships and love, and what guidances you've received in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I had this question in my mind, and I once was able to ask Huzur, because I was always wondering, like, what is the concept of true love in Islam? So I'm not talking about just like dating via arranged marriage, but what does actually true love mean in Islam? So I remember I wanted to ask Huzur about this. And I'll tell you something which I haven't mentioned before, but in order to ask this question, the way Huzur prepared me is he told me to go through certain of his literature where he had covered the concept of marriage. So in one night or 2 nights, I had to read through about 350 or 400 pages, take extensive notes, just to be able to adequately ask about 4 or 5 questions to Huzur, which later we published as an interview. So when I went through all the different things, I humbly mentioned to Huzur that, I said, Huzur, in my personal kind of study, I feel like you have perhaps divided the concept of relationships into 3. One is the moral framework, one is the spiritual framework, and one is a practical framework. So the moral framework is like you should be good with your wife, you should be honest. The spiritual framework is what is mentioned in the Nikah sermon about adopting taqwa and having that connection with God. And the practical framework is practical things like how you get about your life for a better relationship. But I said, Hazur, my question is, how does this concept of true love fit into this framework as opposed to the Western framework? Like, what does it mean? What is love in Islam? So Hazur then, I'll mention briefly, he gave me an anecdote, and he said that there was a boy who was so-called like infatuated by a girl. It's not a true story. It's a boy who's infatuated by a girl, Hazur said, and he's going after this girl all the time. And he's trying to marry this girl, and the father is a bit doubtful about his intentions. And the father says, I don't think you really love her. And he says, no, I do, I really love her. So the father kind of cuts off the girl's hair, it's not a true story, and he makes it so that her outward appearances are no longer as beautiful. And he takes the cut hair, puts it in a bowl, and gives it to that boy. And says, here you go, this is what you really wanted, now go. And the boy starts making excuses like, I don't really want to marry her, etc., etc. So Hazur said the problem here in the West, in other societies, is that the morals take a secondary role. And instead they look at the superficial beauty only. However, at some stage or the other, a girl who is beautiful will not always be beautiful. As you know, at some point, say after you have a child or other points or whatever, just getting older, they will no longer have that same kind of look. So what will happen then? And that's why Islam says, focus on the good behavior. If you think about what that hadith, where you might have heard they keep telling you that look at the behavior first, it's because Islam wants you to have true love. This is what Hazur was explaining to me. That true love can only come if you truly love her for what she is, who she is. And so I know myself, I'll give an example of one or two Ahmadis who went for the superficial beauty only, and they didn't look at the character. And some of them, they went through a lot of trouble later in life. Because when the beauty wore away, then they got to a stage where there wasn't that same compatibility. So Hazur also mentioned something interesting, just two more things about this, that he gives the example of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, that one of his elderly wives, Hazrat Maymuna, 50 years after the Holy Prophet was passed away, she remained alive. And she was so in love with the Holy Prophet that 50 years after the death of the Holy Prophet, this elderly wife of the Holy Prophet said that when I die, I want to be buried in the exact same spot where I first met the Holy Prophet, in that place. And why was that the case? Because the Holy Prophet showed so much love to her. Also, from a logical point of view, Hazur mentioned to me something. In these societies, they will tell you that their form of love is the best, or their form of relationships. But Hazur said, okay, let's look at the facts. If it is true that the way that they teach about relationships in these societies is the best way, how can you answer the following question, Hazur said? Hazur said that people allege that domestic violence is rampant among Muslims. Yet in the UK, in Germany, and even in the United States, we find a huge number of domestic cases between partners, husband and wives. For example, in the UK, 1.3 million women in the year ending of 2018 had domestic abuse, according to official statistics. In Germany, one woman is killed every 3 days by a partner or ex-partner, according to official statistics. Similarly, in the United States, on average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner. During 1 year, this is equal to 10 million men and women, according to a report by the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence in America. So Hazur raised this question that if this is a superior form of relationships, why are these statistics there? This doesn't add up. And these are only the cases that have been reported, Hazur says. What about all the cases that haven't been reported? And this is why Hazur says that Islam says to adopt taqwa, to adopt righteousness for both young men and young girls. And this is why Hazur also encourages, he said, to marry at a younger age. He said, look, Hazur said to me about this topic, that often people allege that why does Islam try to push towards marrying at an early age? Mostly in these societies, if they marry, they'll marry way afterwards. And Hazur said 70-80% of the young girls nowadays at a very young age are already in relationships. Yet they then put allegations against us when we say that you should marry at a young age. It doesn't make sense at all. So in terms of relationships, what I would say is that, but I would say on the other side, that while Hazur said these things, sometimes there is, Islam doesn't have a country it is connected to. Islam is not Pakistani, it's not Indian, it's not African, it doesn't have a color. This is what Hazur said, Islam is just one community. Often and sometimes some practices are brought which are cultural and not Islamic. So for example, let's give you one quick example. Often, sometimes in subcontinental cultures, after marriage, the parents will insist that the child should live in the house of the parent. So Hazur told me once, privately, but then he said, I remember he said it publicly, that Hazrat Khalifatul Masih I was once interpreting a verse of the Quran. And in that verse of the Quran it says, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Sahab, that after you get married, you should go to your parents with gifts and serve them. Is that right? And Hazur said that Khalifatul Masih first interpreted that how can you go to your parents' house after marriage to serve them and gifts if you were in their house? And so in a way it's a command that you should develop your own kind of structure after marriage. Yes, at an elderly age, when your parents get very elderly, you should support them as well. So again, whilst I'm mentioning these things on this side, sometimes on the other side, there are some cultural practices which are not necessarily Islamic. And that's also something to consider.
I want to open it up for questions. If anyone has any questions, please come forward. Or you can, do you have any mic arrangements, Evie? Okay, there's a mic they're bringing up to the front. You can come up and ask your questions to. Chi, come forward, Raghib. Okay, maybe we can do it one or two at a time. You just come closer to the mic. You can come closer so you can do it.
Assalamu alaikum. Amir Safir Sahab and Sadr Sahab.
Is the microphone working? Is the microphone working?
Ji.
Okay, yeah.
Can talk closer. Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah for the opportunity. I had a question that was relating to the concept of true love, as you mentioned, and this is something I've thought of before as well, which is I've heard in Islam, and I forget the reference, that you can only truly love one thing as a human, as a man. And so if you have true love for your wife, does that limit you or prevent you from having true love for Allah? So that is my question.
Yeah. Actually, interestingly enough, when Hazur was giving me the answer, he gave a very brief answer, but he answered this. And Hazur said that it is observed that once, he was giving me the answer when he was talking about true love, and this, he said, it is observed that once the son of Hazrat Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, asked him, that, do you love me? And Hazrat Ali replied, yes. His son then asked, do you love God? Hazrat Ali said, yes. His son asked, how can you have both these loves? Hazrat Ali explained that it is my love of Allah that created within me my love for others and you. So what Hazur is saying is that whilst the love of God is taking precedence, it is that love of God that actually makes you, for example, love your wife more, or love your children more, or love others more, and teaches you the best ways to do that. So it's not a contradiction. In fact, it enhances your love because God ordains that you should do these things. And so they don't clash with each other, but actually if you do it in the right way, you will love your wife more and you will love your children in the right way. Do you want to add anything?
Assalamu alaikum. So my question is simple. I want to know, with your closeness to Huzul, how passionate he is about we becoming Musis, about signing wasiyat, and what are some of the benefits we're going to derive from becoming Musis?
I think that the wider thing which Hazur wants is for people to understand the importance of financial sacrifice and the importance of higher levels of spirituality. And Hazur, as you have heard repeatedly, mentions this as well, that financial sacrifice is repeated in so many places in the Quran. He's mentioned this in his sermons, that this is an extremely important endeavor. God doesn't need our money, but those sacrifices were made from the people before as a way of enhancing your faith. And in terms of wasiyat, of course, there is something that Hazur made an appeal of a long time ago for people to do wasiyat and to make sacrifices. One thing I will say about wasiyat, it is Hazur's wish, and he has mentioned this, that people truly understand the meaning of being a musi, that it's not just giving 1/10 or more of your income, but actually there are many requirements of being a musi in terms of the spiritual aspects, in the terms of how you must behave, how you must pledge to be the best type of Muslim, and the elements you do. So this goes into the wider thing of Hazur saying that just doing things with lip service is not enough, but actually following it through with true actions which are from within, that's what Hazur wants.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. My question is about how Hazur responds to high pressure situations or situations that would traditionally respond like a response of anger. The situation that came to my mind was the martyrdom of the 9 Ahmadis in Burkina Faso. So how does Hazur respond to situations like that?
I think that Hazur mentioned this. I mentioned in yesterday when I was giving some answers relating to the questions I asked about God. And Hazur said that all the khulafa from the promised Messiah till now have exhibited various different qualities, prophetic qualities. Not all of them, but different qualities of different type. It seems like every Khalifa was perfect for that time. So Hazrat Khalifa Masih al-Khamis has an extraordinarily divine-giving source of resilience and source of patience, which is perfect for the time that we are in, considering the things that are happening. So first of all, I'd like to say that Hazur's patience and resilience is exemplary. That doesn't mean Hazur doesn't feel his emotions. Of course Hazur feels emotions. What he does in private will be in private. But in public, he's able to explain that fortitude. One thing I remember once I asked Hazur in a high pressure situation, it was the first Jalsa after COVID. It was a high pressure situation because obviously there was all people coming together after such a long time. We didn't know how arrangements were going to be made. We didn't know if people are going to get sick in large numbers. In fact, Hazur mentioned publicly that the Jalsa administration in the UK said don't have a Jalsa. And Hazur had to overrule them against their advice, and said you should have a Jalsa. I asked Hazur afterwards, that Hazur, how were you so relaxed and calm? People were like, worried and tense. And Hazur said something beautiful. I'm sure you know if you've had mulaqat. Hazur said something in a few words, but those few words have profound meaning. And Hazur said, why will I be worried when it's Allah who does everything? It's not me. My reliance is in Allah. Meaning Hazur's reliance in Allah is so strong that he makes the efforts. He does the prayers as he explained in his sermons. This is the elements that you do make efforts. You have to make the effort to pray. But then he leaves it to God. And his reliance on God is so deep that he leaves it to God. And that's why he said to me as well, that's why I'm not, anxious or worried. Because because I know that it's God who's going to do it, why will I be worried?
Narae Takbir. Hazrat Amirul Momineen, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Khamis, Inni Maka, Narae Takbir.
One final thing I'll say is that, as I said, every Khalifa is perfect for that time. We see in this era, it's unprecedented, because this is the unprecedented era of social media. Like, the amount of attacks now and the amount of information now is more than ever before. And so Khalifa Masih Khamis, as I said, has an extraordinary fortitude given by Allah, which is perfect for this time that we live in.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
My question is about Salat. Our Khalifa always talked about Salat, and we all understand that Salat is the first thing that will be asked of in the Day of Judgment. And I have watched MTA, and there's no point. I see what I see among us, and the Khalifa is always emphasizing on it. So when we are about to say congregational prayers, we always, even the Imam will say, stay shoulder to shoulder. And unfortunately, you will see a lot of gap between us. And even when you're trying to tap the person next to you to come closer, it's like he's irritated with you, or we don't want to come closer to each other. And it's very important to take care of our salat. And I thought it's just in my majlis, but I see it everywhere within the Jama'at. And the Khalifa is always emphasizing on it every day. So I don't know if you want to talk about it.
So, Jazakumullah to the brother. I think Hazur has so extensively spoken about Salat and the etiquettes of Salat and the way of doing Salat. That's one of the topics that Hazur has covered perhaps the most, or spoken about so extensively. And all the etiquettes of Salat are essential. So yes, all the aspects of Salat, the physical aspects are important. The way I'll give you an example. I asked Hazur once that sometimes when you wake up for Fajr, we are wearing our night suits, right? When you're at home, the relaxed kind of very informal clothing. And then we do wudu, and if you're at home, maybe you're not near a mosque, you say the prayer. I said, what do you feel about this? Hazur said to me that your outer state affects your inner state. And so Hazur said that when a person is going before a king, he will prepare him or herself. He will get ready. He will wear good clothes. He will apply perfume. He will ensure that he is in excellent shape because he's coming before a worldly king. So Hazur says to me that imagine you're coming before a spiritual king who is far superior than any worldly king. You should make preparations accordingly. So this is one example of etiquettes, like the brother was saying. In every aspect, and Hazur has mentioned this many times, that unless you pray properly, you will not get many. Just now we had a session after the other day, and somebody was asking about why it's taking long for prophecies to be fulfilled or other things like this. And Hazur has said this many times, that are people praying in the right way? And you might have heard Hazur say many times something which is so incredible, that if every Ahmadi in the world prayed in the correct way, if every Ahmadi in the world prayed in the correct way for just 3 days, we will see so many of the prophecies getting fulfilled quickly, and we will see a revolution so quick. So what the brother is saying is very important. The certain etiquettes of prayer, those relate to the physical postures, because Hazur has said in his sermons, that the promised Messiah has said that we can't deny the physical postures, because the physical postures were a sunnat of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. So because the Holy Prophet went through those physical motions, they're important for us. At the same time, Hazur explained in his sermons that the promised Messiah has said that it's just like, in some ways, Hazur has explained that the spiritual world is not so different to your physical world. So for example, young people here, you're going for an exam, you're going for a job interview. Hazur gave this example once that you will of course prepare. Imagine what happens if you don't prepare for an exam. If you don't prepare for a job interview, what will happen? Yeah, you could pass, but if you're going through other candidates who've prepared extensively, then you're very unlikely to pass your test or get that job. Hazur said the same in the spiritual world. A person is not really that bothered when he's going to the prayer, just does it to go through the motions. When he prays, he doesn't have the full meaning, he doesn't have the full conception of the God in front of him, that he's all-powerful. He doesn't put his energy into the prayer. Hazur said many times that people, Hazur gave this example recently, that the promised Messiah said that, think about when somebody's child gets hurt, or something happens to your child, how worried you become, how anxious you become, how much you cry, or if he's hurt or something, it takes over your whole life. Yet when you pray, we don't give any of that similar type of emotion or energy or passion into the prayer. So yes, the etiquettes of a prayer is something Hazur has repeatedly spoken about. Without the etiquettes of prayer, the prayer cannot be accepted in the same way. And that's many of the reasons why sometimes people ask that why our prayers are not getting accepted. And Hazur explains that because if your etiquettes of the prayers are not correct, you cannot expect your prayers to be accepted.
Assalamu alaikum. I wanted to ask regarding the staunch atheist that you mentioned before, and that you mentioned some arguments or a series of arguments to him that left him. I don't know if you said it kind of affected him in a certain way. So I was wondering if you could briefly go over what exactly you said to him.
Yeah, just very briefly. So Hazur, one of the things when we were doing our existence project, Hazur told me especially to focus on two books. One was Our God, which you might know, by Hadar Mirza Bashir Ahmed, and the other is 10 Proofs of the Existence of God by the second Khalifa, Hadar Muslim Maud, which I would really strongly advise all of you to please read. If you haven't read it, it will really give you a huge understanding of the promised Messiah's concept of God. So, going back to your question specifically about what I said, one of the things I've noticed when I was asking him about the question of God, and this was discussed in that session in the, what's that place called outside? The hub station. So yeah, this was mentioned a lot, that if an atheist says this, an atheist says this. So Hazur often says that if you don't understand there's a life to come, or if you don't explain this, then you can never understand the concepts of suffering, the concepts of other things. You have to understand there's a life to come. So understanding this, what Hazur said, I knew this atheist, he'll come and ask me about suffering. And I explained to him based on the guidance that Hazur mentioned to me, that anyone who faces suffering in this world, God says He will expiate that suffering in the world to come. And Hazur said that the Holy Prophet ﷺ said even the fever he faced was so severe that an ordinary person, you and me, will not be able to bear it. That's aside from the other difficulties he faced. And Hazur said the reason is the Prophets faced the most pain and suffering, because otherwise people would accuse them of not knowing what it's to go through. Anyhow, long story short, I said, understanding all of this guidance, why I'm mentioning this, I used all of this guidance and kind of paraphrased it, and I said to this guy who was getting quite passionate and saying, oh, why is this suffering, blah, blah. I said, look, how old are you? And he said, I think he's 45 or something. I said, tell me honestly, like, how does it feel like, life so far? How fast has it been? He's like, yeah, it's like, it's just gone by. I don't know where it's gone. It felt like so quick. I said, well, that's what our religion teaches us, that this life is just but a few moments. The real life is the life to come. You're admitting yourself, this atheist, that life just has zoomed by. It's just so fast, and we will be gone. And then what happens next? Secondly, the very basic argument I gave him, which Hazur told me to read from Our God and 10 Proofs of the Existence of God, I said to him that the very simple argument, because look, these people, they have no knowledge of Islam. He was sitting on a table eating coffee. Actually, what happened is I was passing by, he was sitting in some kind of restaurant, he just got up and started speaking to me. So I said, based on Our God himself, I said, look, the table you're sitting on, would you admit that could have been created by itself? So yeah, of course not. I said, no, but could all the legs, could all the elements of something simple as a table, and I used the example of the aeroplane, which is Hadrat Khalif Sirabi uses in Revelation Rationality, that could have all the parts come by itself. He said, no, of course, someone would have made it. So I used a very simple argument that you must have heard before, that if that's the case, how can you say that the entire world, the entire universe, with all the elements which are all perfectly aligned, came by itself? Again, look, sometimes these people haven't heard those simple arguments. You're in a Jamaat environment and you're hearing these arguments and you think everyone's heard it. Like, I'm around these people from all countries, from Africa to America, who are running the media around the world. They have not heard any of these arguments. Some of them have PhDs, some of them have others. So speak to them about the really basic arguments. That's what I did. Then the other argument I gave, which is being used there as well, is that Islam believes 124,000 or so prophets came all across the world. Archaeological, sociological evidence shows us, Khalifa Rabi, for example, talks about the Aborigine people and that their belief in the oneness of God. Similarly, you find tribes all across the world from ancient times who believed in a higher power. In those days, it was absolutely impossible to communicate or to travel. It's not possible. They didn't have the technology. You spend your whole life and probably not reach the other side of the world. Some of them didn't even have the transport to get there across the sea. So how is it possible that all these people around the world had a similar concept of a higher power, of a one God, who never met each other, who are in different places and archaeological? So there's many other things. Suffice to say, start with 10 proofs of the existence of God by second Khalifa. Our God, Hazur recommended these 2 books. Give them really basic arguments. And then the final one, which is mentioned in Our God, I'll just mention, is the concept of, they want to know that, like, why can't you see God? Why can't you see God? And then you explain to them, based on what's written in this book, which Hazur recommended, that you have to detect the right thing with the right sense. So you can't say that I will smell the sound of birds chirping. No one will say that. Or you will not say that I would like to hear the smell of a flower. You can't do that. So you have to have the right sense, first of all. And there are some things which you can't detect with your 5 senses. For example, the feeling of love. The feeling of love is something which you feel inside, which is very powerful. It makes your whole life go around, but you can't see the love actually inside you. Like, you might be feeling something right now. You might think of your mother and feel love or something. But no one can see that, hear that. You can't smell it, you can't taste it, but you know it's there. It's detected by, maybe you can, by the outward expression of it. That's something different. So these are concepts that are mentioned in this book, and there are many other arguments. Go and tell them the simple arguments that are mentioned here. For them, they're groundbreaking. For them, they've never heard it before. And like, while he didn't agree with everything, he said, look, I've never heard these before. And this led him to say this.
Assalamu alaikum. In yesterday's session that you had brought the point up that places like Japan, for example, have superior morals but lack the spirituality. How can we ensure that our tabligh efforts are more like catering towards different ethnicities and backgrounds of people rather than just being catered to like a whole different criteria of people, rather than just like, I mean, in a global sense,
Do you mind being slightly more like specific? Like, can you give some more like background what you mean? What's up? Do you understand? Okay. Do you mean like individually, like an individual, or from a Jamaat point of view?
Yeah, as a community, like our outreach. Sometimes I feel like it's only being catered to maybe South Asian or Caucasian.
Okay.
And even, yeah, how can we extend our outreach to more like East Asian and like maybe even Australian, South American, like different parts of the globe? That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, from Hazur's point of view, Hazur is doing what does and wants to do exactly that, and that is his aim. As I mentioned before, Hazur mentioned that Ahmadiyyat doesn't have a specific culture related to it. Ahmadiyyat doesn't have a color. Ahmadiyyat is one color and one community. So Hazur's outreach, if you look at everything Hazur's doing, for example, just take, for example, because I know over here you have many missionaries who've come from Canada, Jamia, and other places, even Dibba South from UK Jamia. Hazur has sent missionaries to almost every country in South America, for example. We already have missionaries all across Africa, in fact, probably more than anywhere else. So there's already a lot of outreach happening there. We have missionaries Hazur sent to New Zealand and Australia. Hazur has sent missionaries to many islands. You might know people, some of them are here, who are in the Marshall Islands, Kiribati Islands, many other islands. So Hazur is sending, first of all, missionaries to many different places. In the last 10 years, after the Jamia students have graduated, after Jamias were set up, he's sending them everywhere, exactly for that purpose that you are saying, that to make sure that the outreach is everywhere. Secondly, so I'm also serving as the in charge of translations in MTA, and Hazur's wish is to get it to many languages as possible. Right now we've reached 23 languages, but it depends on the training of people. And we've started even under Hazur's guidance in Tamil and Malayalam in India. The Friday sermon goes. Under Hazur's guidance now, we do it every week in Hausa, Yoruba, Twi, and other languages of Africa, and that's increasing. Under Hazur's guidance, we now have Spanish translation live every week, which goes to 450 million people of the world. So, in answer to your question, and then also under Khilafat Khamisa, you've had things like the Braille Quran, you've had things like the Maori translation of the Quran of the Maori tribe in New Zealand. So, in terms of Hazur's outlook, I can't speak of individuals, but what does Khalifatul Masih want? There's many other examples of how Hazur is absolutely trying to reach every single person and trying to set platforms of how we can increase our language capacity, because one of the things is language. If you don't have the language, you can't reach those people. So I know, being involved as a translator, Hazur is continuously increasing the scope of languages. He's sending missionaries, and he already has, to all these different countries, and that continues to grow and expand in that way.
Assalamu alaikum. So recently we have seen Hazur face health issues. So being someone in close proximity of Hazur, how do you see Hazur balance, both sides, the workload of the Jamaat, being accessible, being available to the Jamaat 24/7, day in and day out, but also at the same time take care of his personal health, take time for himself, because, both reflect each other. So if there's not one, there's not the other. So how do you see that, being someone who's constantly in touch with Hazur?
I think alhamdulillah, Hazur, health-wise, as you know, he mentioned in the sermon about his health. And when I saw Hazur afterwards, a few days after his operation, and this is all published, so, I went in his office and he was just as he was before, as if nothing happened, doing his work. And when I came to ask him about his health, he's like, just, it's fine, let's continue the work. And he had all his files laid out, 400 or 500 letters, signing them away. But he did mention, and this is published, that this is, in terms of his health, it's alhamdulillah, the operation was successful. But he also mentioned that this is not something new. He was facing this for 4 years before this heart pain, etc. And now he was in a stage to be treated. In terms of how he balances it, I think alhamdulillah, Hazur is, as I mentioned just now when I saw him, he's carrying out all his activities. Many times in the last few weeks in Islamabad, he's made spontaneous walks throughout Islamabad to inspect different parts of Islamabad. But Hazur also mentioned in Germany Jalsa that there is some human necessities. Everyone, even prophets, had to face those. And so Hazur mentioned that as a result of certain human necessities, there are certain physical repercussions of that. Those were faced by the prophets of God. Those were faced by previous khulafa. So I think in that sense, Hazur, in terms of balancing that with that, then of course, alhamdulillah, as you know, Hazur mentioned it himself in Germany Jalsa, that he did listen to the advice of the doctors. He listened to the advice of the doctors and didn't go. And I thought that was a great decision. He stayed there and delivered it virtually. But I think now, one thing we have which is incredible, which was never there before, is that although he didn't physically go, he was able to still, be present there virtually. He was still able to deliver the address. He's still reaching out to everyone every week. And even now, I've noticed an increase on physical people coming. I know in America they're having a lot of groups coming, but I've seen more and more groups are coming there. So I think the balance in terms of health and work, Hazur continues to do all his work. He will never stop that. But in some senses, like I said, he listened to the advices of the doctor. He did the operation. He mentioned all these things he's mentioned himself. But from our side, we can, everyone loves Hazur. Everyone wants Hazur to be in the best possible state. But what can we do to help Hazur? What makes Hazur the happiest? What makes Hazur the happiest is when he sees the mosques full. What makes Hazur the happiest is when he sees Khudam and Atfal fulfilling their pledges and keeping their identity. Hazur mentioned once that all these small issues, like what I mean by small issues, like preventable issues, Hazur will always be helping people, but issues like marriage breakups and other things that are just caused by egos and Hazur is dealing with. Hazur said, if I didn't have to deal with all these issues, I could spend all that time on the propagation of the faith, on other things that of Islam which he wants to do. So we also have a responsibility in our small circles to try and, as much as possible, to try and help Hazur in his mission instead of, due to our own faults, create problems. In that sense, that will also save time.
Narae Takbir. Hazrat Khalifatul Masihul Khamis. Hazrat Khalifatul Masihul Khamis. Inni Maka. Inni Maka. Narae Takbir.
Assalamu alaikum. As the Jamaat grows, it'll become harder and harder for us just to maintain a personal relationship with Hazur, because necessarily if Hazur is receiving, let's say, inshallah, like the Jamaat grows tenfold, he'll be receiving tenfold as many letters, tenfold as many problems will be, I mean, hopefully not, but more and more issues will be coming to him. So do you have any insight into how in the future, if there's inshallah going to be tens of millions or hundreds of millions of Ahmadis, how we can keep that personal relationship with the Khalifa?
I can't predict the future, but what I can say is that I think rather than worrying about what's going to happen in that time, what are we doing now? I'll give you an example of a khadim who I met just recently in Islamabad. He just came and approached me and said salam. I said, oh, where are you from? He said, I'm from Germany. And then I said, okay, so tell me more about yourself. He said, oh, I come here every month. I've been coming every month for the last 2 years. I said, okay, I didn't notice him before. But I said, what's your story? He said, he's a business person. He has a business. Every month, he drives 12 hours to Islamabad. He doesn't go, he decided that, yeah, I can go on holiday, but for me, this is something that is so beneficial for me. He drives 12 hours every month, books a hotel nearby, and he doesn't make a scene. Like, I didn't even see him for a year and a half, although I visit Islamabad regularly. So it's not like he's making a scene, he goes there. He doesn't have mulaqat, this guy. He just wants to be doing namaz behind Hazur and be in the presence of that atmosphere. And every month for 2 years, apart from COVID, he kept on doing this. And I said, so what did you get out of this? He said, I cannot tell you how many blessings I received. I received so many blessings personally, in my self-development, in my business. And it so happened that in those 2 years, Hazur a few times came out for spontaneous walks. And because he was regularly there, Hazur got to kind of know who he was as well. So people find creative ways. People find very creative ways to, build a connection with Hazur. And I would say that keep writing. I know people, I won't mention the names, I know people even in America who have such a deep connection with Hazur through writing letters and showing sincerity more than people in the UK. I've seen it myself with my own eyes, and Hazur mentioning about them. I've seen people in Germany who sometimes have closer relationship than those in the UK, and vice versa. So I think that don't worry about the future right now, and I can't say what the future will be. The Khalifa of the time will decide in such situations. But right now, there's so many examples I can give you of Khuddam who find innovative ways and who really try to build a connection with Hazur. So I would say keep writing to Hazur, keep praying for Hazur. If you have an opportunity, people who can afford it, go there. If you can get mulaqat, great. If not, spend some time there and benefit from that, presence. Also, one final thing I would say is that, if you're doing something which is really beneficial for Jamaat, which is for the progress of the Jamaat, then that will also get Hazur's attention. Let's say you come with some new research or something that will really benefit the Jamaat in some way, then I believe that will also definitely, Hazur will, look at that even more.
Jazakumullah. In the end, the last question I want to ask is, of course, alhamdulillah, we have received Hazur's message, and I hope that we'll continue reading that and acting upon it as well. You mentioned to us that you had a mulaqat before coming. Was there anything that you would want to share with the Khuddam being here that you had from Hazur in your mulaqat that you feel that you want to convey? We can take that as the last question.
Yeah, I think one thing, I mentioned it yesterday, but I'll mention it again. What Hazur said in relation to Salat, which was his message that Sadr Sahib read out, is that Hazur said that recently I've been giving these sermons on the Badri companions. He said this just before I left. And people who understand will understand and understand what I was trying to say when I said, and Hazur mentioned this almost twice, and I heard him say in the virtual mulaqat recently, and he keeps mentioning this point recently in the last few days, that in the Battle of the Ditch, when they said it was one of the most dangerous moments in the Islamic history of the lifetime of the Holy Prophet. They were surrounded by all sides. They were one of the biggest armies in the history of Arabia was raised against them. And the Holy Prophet was of course concerned about the life of his own and other people, but what gave him the biggest concern, as he was telling me, was the fact that one of the prayers in the day had to be delayed. That's what gave him the biggest pain, that he couldn't pray to his God in the way possible. He couldn't pray with the khushu, with the crying and weeping that he wanted to, and the longing. That's what it was. So to reach that state, you have to develop your prayers. You have to develop the etiquettes of your prayers. As I said, Hazur said, those who will understand what I was trying to say. Meaning that everything in life has to revolve around prayers. And everything has to revolve around that. And that's one important thing which you should consider.
Jazakumullah ahsan al-jazaa to everyone, mashallah. I could see from here everyone is paying attention, and I hope and pray that we'll all benefit from these guidance that Huzur Anwar has given us through Sayyid Amir Safir Sahib. And I request everyone to continue praying for Khalifatul Masih. And I know the brother asked about the future and what can be done. It's, of course, is a very, very important question, and hopefully you live to see that. Maybe most of us won't see it, but inshallah you live to see it. But you know, the blessings of Khilafat is such that when we think that there's no way out, when we think that it's humanly impossible for something to happen, and I'm sure Amir Safir Sahib will agree, when we think that it's impossible for 20 people to do something, Allah Ta'ala gives that strength, that wisdom, that knowledge to Khalifatul Masih somehow, and he's able to execute so many things every day. You know, me being a murabbi myself, and I have a masjid that I have to lead prayers, you were talking about the etiquettes of salat. You know, you go to Islamabad, even Fajr prayer, if you see the way Huzur is dressed, it's almost as if he's going to deliver a speech at the most important, you know, gathering in the world. You can see it. You'll never see Huzur's beard, you know, off a little bit. You'll never see that his, you know, his turban is just to the right, or his achkan, or you know, his clothes aren't ironed, or his socks, there's something wrong. It's almost always perfect, no matter how close you look. And it makes you imagine, at that age, how is it that somebody can present themselves so perfectly every time? You know, in a mulaqat, in a group mulaqat once in the USA delegation, Abdul Hayy Thomas, most of you know him, asked Huzur that your beard is so beautiful, who lines it up for you? And Huzur laughed and said, what are you talking about? I do it myself. So to show you again that these are things that when you observe closely, you see is something that's humanly impossible for one person to be so meticulous, to be so amazing in the way they carry themselves. So inshallah, it's our prayers, of course, with the blessings of Allah, with the favors of Allah, that will continue to strengthen Khalifatul Masih in his health, in his wisdom, in his knowledge, to continue to guide all of us. So I think we can adjourn for tonight, inshallah.